This from the Olmsted camp meeting. Not the Elko, but the Olmsted camp meeting. And I pretty well got the history of the whole works. And not only just I've got it in my mind, I've got a stack of large books from 1942. I don't mean these new ones, I'm talking about old books, big thick books, that until he died in 52. And I pretty well know the overall perspective of things, but there has been an advancement, thank God for that. Sometimes we were smaller than we was, and other times we got a little large. But there was an advancement. But now in these, after Brother Jolly was in for a while, of course you know how things went. And I'm not trying to bring up anything that would hurt him, but we all know more what history tells us. And then when we left, the pendulum began to swing too far to the left. We got to the place that we was afraid. Everybody listen to me now. We was afraid somebody was going to be the head of this body. And I was branded a number of times that I was trying to jockey for headship. Well, brother, anybody knows me knows that's wrong. And if we'd mentioned anything about getting together and forming a group of men that would sort of look over the congregation, help and assist them in things that they weren't capable and coming to conclusions on, and then all the ministers work together with them. I told you. I knew it was going to happen. I told you, didn't I? A few years ago it was going to happen. That's what people say. Well, don't you folks realize that you've got to have leadership in this body? You may not believe there's apostles or anything like that. I don't believe there's apostles as great as they were before. But brother, if we don't have apostles in this body, we're sunk. We're sunk. Do you think prophets are going to lead us? Do you think evangelists can lead us? Do you think pastors can lead us? Do you think teachers can lead us? Yeah. And there's hardly anybody in this body will acknowledge what they are. I know I'm taking you to task right now, but is it true, is it not true? If I'd ask somebody what you are, I say, well, what if you got a job in a factory somewhere and you punched in that morning and the boss came up to you and said, who are you? Well, I said, I'm Cornelius Mears. What are you doing in here? Well, I thought I had a job. Well, what are you assigned to? I don't know. Get out of here and go back to the office. Well, there's a whole lot of truth in that, ain't there? What if you sat down in the doctor's office and you had 2 jaw teeth to take out surgically? And you looked up at that feller and someone called him and said, say, I want you to shoe 2 of my horses. Brother, I'd jump out of that thing and get to going. Yeah. I'm going to be leaving Sunday. I'm going out to the airport. I'm going to be 4 hours in an airplane to Chicago. Let me tell you, brother, if I sat down in that airplane and that stewardess come by and she says we've got several fine, intelligent, honest, upright, loyal, dignified men in the cockpit, I'd say, did they ever fly a plane before? She had said no, but they're wonderful men. I'd say, let me offer you. Well, that's just an example to show you that the Lord has sent it up on high and gave gifts unto men for the perfecting of the saints. And there's certain men that's got certain offices in the church. Apostles, prophets, and teachers, and there's helpers in the church that helps them. And I've got to find my position in the church so that I can be effective. And when we've got a problem to deal with, if we throw that problem out, and with all respect to you fellas, if we throw that problem out to all of the ministers in this body, what do you think we're going to come up with? And honestly, we may laugh, and I'm glad. I'd rather for you to laugh and to cry. But we're faced with a problem. We're faced with a problem. And I have never seen yet a fundamental doctrine. Now, you say, are you mad at us? No, I'm mad. No, I love you and I'm trying to help you. I've never seen a fundamental doctrine since I've been in the ministry in these meetings completed where we said, this is that. This is it. And all the ministers said, amen. Have you? If you have, I wasn't in that meeting. Now, I'm not trying to belittle anybody, but I'm showing you we need leadership, not one-man leadership. And some people say, well, Brother Sowders said there'd never be a one-man leader. That's true. That's true. We don't want a one-man leadership. Because you see what one-man leadership has done. If I don't care, any of you fellows here, any of you, including myself, if you get off by yourself and people make you a leader of the whole body, you'd get some funny hallucinations about the Bible. And that's happened. We see it, don't we? We see that. But in a multitude of counselors, there's safety. But there's some men that God gives offices to that demands more attention than others. Is that right? And they can do more for people than other people can do. And strange as it may seem, the apostles were the men that received the revelation, and everything built on that foundation. And that don't rule out the fact that some other ministers could get a revelation, but if he gets a revelation, it would have to be according to those 12 apostles' teachings. Are you following me? It couldn't be different than those 12 apostles' teachings. If it did, it'd be false. And after all, we've arrived at a place that we need help. We need instructions. We need guidance. And I admit that, don't you? In the book of Numbers, they got the place that every man did that was right in his own eyes. Well, if God has put you over an assembly, it's all right for you to take charge of that assembly. But then I don't have time to go into details how assembly was brought out in the early church. I think that was brought out last night, wasn't it? The apostle planted. The apostle laid the foundation, or taught. And when Philip went down to Samaria and preached Christ to the people, he revolutionized things down there. People were converted and baptized in water. Devils were cast out and people were healed. But there was something, brother, his office run out of authority right there. And when the brethren of Jerusalem heard that Samaria had received the word, they sent 2 apostles down and they planted the church. And Paul said, I have planted and Apollos watered. But of course God gave the increase. And then when there was a dispersion of Jerusalem because of persecution, they went everywhere preaching. And they went down to Antioch, which was in Syria, and they began to preach down there. And many people came into the church. But again, we find it. When the apostles at Jerusalem, not Tom, Dick, and Harry, but when the apostles at Jerusalem heard that Samaria had received the word, they sent Barnabas down, didn't they? Just exactly like they sent Peter and John down to Samaria. And many people were added to the church. That's the same thing. So we see that was the order. That was the order. Every man in his own order. Every seed after its own kind. And won't it be wonderful when we get to the place that we know our position in the Lord? Now, I'm going to tell you something. We're getting nearer to this than you think we are. I wouldn't dare put a time period on when the Lord's coming back or anything like that. But when you see these things come to pass, look up and lift up your head is a better warning to you. And don't you see these things coming? Bells are ringing, lights going on and off. All kinds of signs and things are happening. Get ready, the evening shadows fall. Don't you hear that Eliezer call? And our next, to me, if I'm right on it, if I'm wrong, I'm just wrong. I'm honestly wrong. The next important move for us to make. Now, we've discussed that for over 50 years. And like you said last night, you could elaborate a little more on that. We are together. It's amazing how many things we're together on. And it's amazing how many ministers have influenced other ministers that's come into this body by teaching them about the things that we have understood. And that is true. But there's some things now that we ought to focus our attention on just a little more than about just the general runs of doctrines that we've been dealing with for over 50 years. Not that we're going to do away with it. Don't misunderstand me. That is my idea. But if a fellow was in a wreck and he broke 2 teeth out and his arm was almost cut off, and when the ambulance rolled up and the doctors jumped out with their little bags, they run over this fellow and they looked at him. He had 2 teeth broken, his arm almost cut off. This fellow started working on his teeth and he's bleeding like a hog. Started working on his teeth. Well, you say, that feller's nuts. Feller's nuts. He ought to start working on the thing that was the most important. And brother, the most important thing right at the present time is, and I'll say this gracefully, for God to have a handful of ministers that has got a track record and has been in this a long time, and they've proven that they know something about what they're talking about, and they've got some experience and they've got some examples. For those men to begin to take on that. Now we say, well, who told you to? Let me tell you something. Who told you to get in that church that you're in? Come on. Who told you to take that church you're in? Well, you say the Lord did. Well, if I'm not mistaken, and I pray a whole lot about things, the Lord told me to do just what I'm doing. Just like He told you to go to that church and told you fellas to go to your churches. And He's telling you something to do, isn't He? And I'm talking about certain men that, not for high positions, we all ought to be humble and work together. And if you've got anything to add to it, fine. But don't you think there's a handful of men among us that's able to deal with cases kindly and lovingly and patiently and according to this Bible and give an answer or a prescription to help people? Don't you believe there's men like that now? Then if there isn't, brother, we're a hopeless bunch of people after over 50 years. We're just another little group of Pentecostal people. Don't entertain the thought that you're going to help judge this world. You'll be lucky to get out of it. I say that very tenderly. I say that very tenderly. We've got some cases. We've got some cases. It's pending. And they're pending because there's nobody has ever been able to get a committee or a group of people together. And whether people likes it or not, I think we ought to do it. I think we're doing it on the side anyway. We've got 3 or 4 cases and among the ministers of this body of people that's become adverse. And it's absolutely necessary to deal with it for the benefit of the saints of God and the preacher himself. I don't mean one, I mean a number of them. And we ought to deal with that according to the Bible. And if we're not in a position after all these years to have a group of men that'll deal with that, and the rest of the men hold their hands up because they're going to use the Bible on their final answers to these things, then, like you said, we ought to almost quit preaching. What are we preaching about? What are we trying to build up? What are we trying to demonstrate? What are we trying to put before the public? What are we trying to do that will cause God to justify Himself in bringing almost a genocide to this whole entire world? Don't you know a little later that God's going to call out of Babylon every honest-hearted people, come out of her, my people, my people, my people. His people's in Babylon, and there's millions of fine people in Babylon, got a good honest heart, and loves God just as much or maybe more than a lot of us do. And God's going to give them a chance. Well, who's He going to give them a chance with? He's going to give him a chance with a church that has become an organism. Don't you all see that? Or if you don't see that, what are you working? What are you working to develop in this body of people? If you're not working to develop something that's on the solid rock 100% and deals with cases just like an organism would warn you if something's wrong, and everything in that body, when something begins to get wrong, it comes to the front and it begins to fight that disease. What are we going to do about these cases? I'll tell you what we're going to do if we do it naturally. We're just going to talk about it. We're going to get our little briefcases and catch our airplane and get in the car and go on home. Then a month or two later, here we come back again. Here we come back again with our briefcases and get off the airplane and find ourselves a motel or a home, and we'll talk about it again. And while in the absence of us not making the decision, saints of God and ministers are suffering out there. Amen. And we're bringing a reproach. And people are backsliding. And I'd like for it to be fixed that there'd be such a fear of God, and God won't put a fear of God on there unless there's a law. Paul said, I was alive without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. The law brings condemnation. It don't bring justification to you and continuing in that. But the law brings condemnation. I would not have known sin, but the law said, thou shalt not covet. And when people begin to see that, and see that there's a law to take care of that, and a lot of people say, oh, he's my buddy. Buddy nothing. Let's be God's buddy, Jesus' buddy. Let's obey them and stand by them. And let me say something else. Anything that happens in any church in this body affects every one of us. Yes, we just had a condition in several different places. Well, everybody more or less knows it, but there's several different churches. And that is because, let me say this with all respect to you, that's because ministers did not set their churches in order right. That's right. And just left it by some little verbal expression of promise. Brother, if you've got a church, you better get that church in order to where if you die, you've groomed someone to take your place, and you don't have to go out and get a bunch of preachers from all over the country to come in and take that church over. That's not according to God's law. Raise up somebody among you. Groom that person. Deal with that person. Let them get the characteristics and the atmosphere of the church. Let the people know them, and they know you and you know them. And watch in your church when you see a man beginning to get head and shoulders above the rest of them. I don't mean climbing over their shoulder, but whenever you see his ability, begin to start grooming him and giving him a chance to exercise himself and give him some sort of work to do in the church and see how he works at it. And watch him real close. And as he develops, and here's a brother right here knows that. We've got at least a dozen men in our church. Remember, God wants the ministers to begin to train young men to be ministers. That shows these signs and developments of being a minister. And then we've got a number of churches among us. If you die, chances are the church would go to pieces. And don't have faith in people too much. A man can be your friend today, and if you do something, just a little something against him, he'll be your enemy. Right. But fix it legally. Remember, we're not living in Paul's day. They didn't have building. They didn't have a lot of property like we do. And we've got to adjust ourselves to the laws of the land in which we live, the state in which we live, according to what they expect, according to their laws. And every time something happens in a church, whether it's good or bad, it has some effect on our churches. Yes. And the big problem that hangs before us is how are we going to deal between now and Sunday with these 4 or 5 different cases, and they're getting very adverse in our midst. Who's going to deal with them? Who's going to deal with them? Are we just going to call Tom, Dick, and Harry out to deal with them? When you want your teeth pulled, you go to a dentist, don't you? You want a pretty good one, don't you? I went to a town in Illinois when I first went there, and I asked the people, some of the businessmen, I said, who's the best dentist? I've got several teeth that need to be extracted and filled. Well, he told me. I thought, well, maybe you're wrong. So I went to several others, and they agreed with him. I said, well, amen, that's the one. So I went to the best dentist in town. Say if you're going to be operated on, they're going to put you to sleep and cut about a 14-inch slash in your stomach. Take something out of it. Are you just going to take the advice of one doctor? Are you going to several doctors and talk to them about it and get examinations and x-rays and fluoroscopes and God knows what else? You want to be sure before they put you to sleep that they know what they're doing. Yes. I know one time some people moved into our little country town in Shippingport, Kentucky. And this boy looked like a hippie. Of course, in that day, there wasn't no such thing as hippies. But the poor thing, they didn't have no money to get the boy a haircut. And a couple of us fellers said, we'll fix him up. And we told this woman, said, we're barbers. Said, we'll fix this boy up, make him look different. We sure made him look different. We started with a pair of dull scissors. I tell you, that fella he looked like a hippie does nowadays with his hair sticking this way one place. None back here, none up here. We almost had to leave town on that deal. But anyway, that's why a lot of preachers, they go to places they have to leave between two suns. But the main thought is that we don't want to expose anybody, and I don't want anybody to expose me, of course. But we don't want to expose anybody. But a half a dozen, or I wouldn't want 7. I wouldn't want 12. I'd be criticized for it. But we get a few men to start. We're going to have a meeting between services, and we're going to deal with a certain large church in this United States. There's trouble there. There's a few of us who've been doing that for years. Is that right? And it's had a certain amount of effect, has it not? It's had a certain amount of effect. Yes. But there is a better way. We'd like for all the people to know. And then if you can contribute something to the ones that has been doing this for years, that's going to help. That don't mean that we'll be aloof from everybody else. But if you've got something to put into it biblically to help and assist, fine. But remember, there's a president of the United States. There's a vice president. There's a Senate. There's a Supreme Court, and on down to the lowest man in the corner of an alley of some town. A magistrate. But they're all working in coordination and crystallized together. And that's the way we should have the whole body. And then there's safety in the body. There's safety in the body. And let me say something else. Don't you men think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Remember, when I was first sent out in the ministry by my father, he said, Jim, I want to tell you something. He said, remember, they are God's sheep that you're going to. They don't belong to you. You didn't die for them. But they're the shepherds, the chief shepherd's sheep. And he's just using you to help feed them. Feed my sheep. My sheep. They don't belong to you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. They don't belong to you. Just feed them. And Paul said, I've dealt with you as a nurse would her young. The thought in mind is, try to save people if you got to turn it over backwards. Then when they leave, then you have no regret. You have a regret they're leaving, but you have no regret that you caused them to leave. And all the ministers should begin to work together and coordinate in that. But there's got to be some people that sets the pace. And whether you know it or not, there's been several of us ministers have been, when you folks were laying down somewhere, and of a nighttime, way after midnight sometimes, we've been discussing things and trying to help people. And it's worked to an extent. But we'd like for you to know about it. We don't want to tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry about all the incidental things that happens, but we would like for you to know that we're working in your interest. And if you've got problems in your church that you can't take care of, they ought to be men. They ought to be men to come to your church. You ought to write them and tell them, not to come there and hold you an evangelistic meeting, not to come there and get the people to shouting, but come there and try to help you solve the problems. Don't get before the people and tell them, but talk to the minister and let him tell you the problems he's got in the church that he can't deal with. And then you, in a diplomatic way, pull the stinger out of the bee without getting stung. And a lot of times you can take a window out of a house. You don't have to go in there with a sledgehammer and tear the side of the wall out to get a window out, or knock half the house down to get a door out, but just kind of slip it out easy like. Yeah. I know I was operated on for my back not too long ago, about a year ago. Had 2 spurs resting on this sciatic nerve, and the doctor said if those bones press too hard against that and cut it, you'll be a cripple the rest of your life. So I was between a rock and a hard place, so I submitted. And I never will forget, I went in there, they wheeled me in there, of course, in that, that outfit, and I was all dressed up in some kind of a colored clothes, looked like green, big lights shining all around, almost blind me, and nurses and doctors working around. And the main doctor come in and said, "Good morning, Reverend, how are you?" I said, "All right." And somebody, I don't know whether it was a man or a woman, got to playing around my neck. And I was normal. I knew everything. I was rational. And all at once, this party got the fooling around my neck, and I was gone. It wasn't a judo cut or nothing like that. He stuck something in me. And I was gone. I went out like a light. When I woke up, the operation was all over, and I was back in my room. Yeah. Well, that's the way to deal with people. All of us, more or less, don't you have a problem in your church? Or is everything going just 100% tranquilly arranged? Or you have problems? Do you have problems? Maybe you have a problem with yourself. You ought to tell us that. We can help you, can't we? I know a lot of times I'm a marriage counselor. Don't ever be a marriage counselor unless you know something about it, unless you've been married too. You can become a better marriage counselor if you've been married, can't you? And I always tell them there's more thrill in the chase than there are the capture. Let that soak in a little bit. There's more thrill in the chase than the capture. Do you ever see a girl walking along and a boy with holding hands? Do you wonder why they do that before they marry? I'll tell you why they do it. They get a kick out of it. This ain't going downstairs or anything. This is going. They get a thrill out of it. They get a lift out of it. Sensation out of it. Nouns, pronouns, and suffixes, and all dots and commas. And I've noticed in particular, like Paul said, he was in watchings often. Don't you watch all these things? How could you be a marriage counselor if you didn't watch all these things and have some experience yourself? And then after the honeymoon is over, the moon goes into an eclipse. And he don't hold her hand anymore. That electrical thrill is gone somewhere, and you can't find out where it went to. Oh, that's the truth, brother, and you know it yourself. I'm telling you the actual truth. Yeah, well, once in a while an old man holds his old lady's hand. That's to keep him falling most of the times, I guess. Amen. Now I'm saying this by way of illustration. And then, of course, I tell them, I say now, a lot of times they don't pay too much attention to me. I can tell that because the bug has bit them and they've lost their mind temporarily. Really, you kind of lose your mind like that, you know. All you got to do is get a thrill is to pass by our house before you get married and look up her and say, she's there, all right. You get a little thrill out of that. And I tell the people, now you should consider hereditary inheritance. If her mother weighs about 400 pounds and her father's a big portly ugly-looking man. Hereditarily, don't think that she's going to stay real slim all of her life, because that hereditary condition is going to hit her after a while, and she's going to start picking up in weight. And she may take all the diets possible, but she's inherited a big physical body from Mama. And you say to her, I wonder why you're getting so heavy. I wonder why you're getting so fat. Why, you dummy, you ought to look at her mother before you married her. Now, this is illustrations. I'm not saying to get you all to laugh, but this is illustrations. And I always tell people, don't marry summer and winter. Oh, I'm playing when I talk to people, yeah. Because summer and winter does not harmonize. They're two different conditions. And many a time, summer left winter because they didn't harmonize. I go into all that. And don't never marry an educated woman. Should not never marry a dumb, nitwit man. Because there's going to be embarrassment. Oh, yes, that's the truth. I've experienced all that. I've had about a dozen churches in my life. And I've experienced all that. Yeah. And I go into a lot of other details. I had a couple came to me in the church, and they wanted to adopt a child because something was wrong with her physical condition. She couldn't have a child. They were just young people. Both of them worked at the hospital. You know who I'm talking about. And they come to my home. And you see, we're too quick to give advice a lot of times. That's the truth. You ought to know what you're talking about before you give advice, because you give advice to, whether it's preachers or women or what it is, you're going to be charged for advice you give them if it's wrong. So I told him, I said, and that's a ticklish piece of business. This woman's passing through a period of time, and she wanted a bundle of love, a little soft bundle of flesh to hold. And that's the nature of a woman. All right? And that was her condition when they come here. And I said, now, I'm not going to give you any private interpretation. Brother, if you're a real Bible student, you don't have to give private interpretation. Give what holy men of God wrote by the Holy Ghost. I said, I'm going to give you two witnesses. I'm going to let them speak to you, not me. I said, one is Jesus, and the other is Paul. I said, Jesus said when a woman he was going to the cross, she said, blessed are the paps that gave thee suck. And Jesus said, blessed are the paps that never gave suck. Sound like he hated children. And then I said on another occasion, he said, pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, and woe be unto them that have child and give suck in those days. I said the reason why that was, he wasn't against people having children legitimately. He loved children because he rebuked the disciples when they said, don't let the children come to me and so forth. But I said he was talking about a period of time that was coming on them. That they was going to have to face starvation, and some of them was going to eat their own children. And the Roman soldiers were going to take their little feet and beat their brains out against the walls. Josephus describes a lot of that if you read the book of Josephus. I said, because of conditions that was soon to prevail, Jesus spoke these words. If it had been a time that when things were peaceable for years and years, he would never have said that, would he? I said, then Paul in the 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians balanced it so beautifully on marriage and divorce. Paul said the time is short. They that have wives be as though they have none. They that possess as though they possess not. They that weep as though they weep not. What in the world was he talking about? He was talking about these things that ordinarily have a tendency to impede your progress in the Lord if you give too much attention to any natural thing. That's what he was talking about. And then I showed him that the Bible said you can marry, but you'll have trouble in the flesh. And then again, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. Without distraction. I said, where was you the other night? She had this baby in her arms. She sings in our church. I said, where was you the other night? And she kind of smiled, and she said, I was in the back of the house. I said, that's just the point. What was you doing in the back of the house? I had the baby in my arms. I said, you understand, don't you? She kind of grinned. She says, yeah, I understand. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Paul, if possible, wanted people to give a real dedication to God. He said, she that is married cares for the things of the world. And now, that don't mean the ungodly world that caused you to break commandments, but that's the world. If you ever get over there, you won't marry or give in marriage, but you'll be as the angels. Is that correct? And then again he said, but she that is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in what? Body and spirit. So he differentiated there, but his thought in mind was this. It was only about 3 more years. Think of this now, that Paul was going to be alive, and not quite that many. And Armageddon was just around the corner. And you've got to get these settings to where it's dealing with conditions and geographical locations and so forth and so on who it's talking to. And that's the same way with us now. We're facing a problem in our churches. And there's an answer for it, just like these answers I gave those people. There's an answer for it. There's an answer for it. It necessitated them. See, it wasn't in the law book about the 6th chapter of the book of Acts. There arose a murmuring among the Grecians because their widows were neglected in the daily administration. That was something that just developed. Time developed that. And they called the apostles, and why didn't they call the evangelists in for that? See, those men were considered. And those men had the knowledge. Now, they didn't go to the Bible and get that. But you know, a lot of times there's some things that you, through experience, is the best teacher, that you can give advice. Paul gave advice about certain things about marriage that Jesus never dealt with. Am I right on that, or am I wrong? Never dealt with. But because of his position, the Spirit of God quickened him and gave him wisdom on how to do that. Don't you know that this surely must be a God that loves us, and all the years we've suffered, and all the years we've sacrificed, and all the years we've came to these meetings and took a chance on getting barbecued in airplanes or head-on collisions on highways. What do we do that for? To bring us to where we are today. Now we're here. God, help each other. Let us help each other. Let us not fail on some basic important thing right now. Our people needs help. Our churches need help. We need help. The ministers needs help. Jesus, when he was here on this earth, he worked for 3 years and a half hard to make people one. And then he had to say to the Father, you make them one. And words cannot make you one. It takes the Spirit of God to blend and mix in with that Spirit. And the Lord gave them a spirit to work, a mind to work. And if the Lord hadn't have done that, Nehemiah and Ezra and Zerubbabel and Zechariah and those men could holler, all right, let's all go to work. But there had to be an inspiration given to them to cause them to go to work. And see, we're facing something. Now, a lot of you fellows can leave this church. You can go back to your churches and you're just all right. But if we leave this church knowing that there's people out there crying, there's people out there perplexed, and there's people out there may lose their souls, we're not going to leave the church just like you leave it. Because we feel a responsibility. We want to do something and take something back to them, don't we, brother? We want to take something back to them to give them encouragement and strength. And sometimes you got to make enemies. We seek to please man, we can't please God. And here's something else that says, we've got to watch ourselves. We can't be a lord over God's heritage. Can we? We can't be a dictator over God's heritage. Remember, God loves them just as well as He does you. Somebody said, well, one preacher's worth 1,000 members. I don't know about that. You got any Bible for that? Jesus said, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me, and so forth, and sick. And they acted, oh, well, Lord, when did we do this to you? When did we see you in this condition? And the trouble was, they had in their mind Jesus. A lot of people love Jesus, but don't love the people. A man says he loves God and hates his brother. He's a liar, and the truth isn't in him. God help us to have more love for each other, the ministers and the lay members of the church. But Jesus said, as often as you have done this to the least of these little ones of mine, you have affected me. You've done it unto me. And I hope that all of you will get under a burden for what I'm talking about. We don't want to leave here, do we? And not have some kind of word of consideration for these people that are in need. No need of me calling their names out and telling you there's people like that, and there's other people that's going to get in trouble. And I urge everybody that's got a church, for goodness sake, see that you've got somebody leaving charge of that church, and make it legal. Get a lawyer. Draw up some paper. Let him draw up some papers. Get witnesses and sign it to who's to take charge of the church after your decease. A lot of people procrastinate and wait and die, and then there's trouble. Let me tell you something, brother. You can't put 100% confidence in a whole congregation of people after you die if you don't leave the church in order. Well, of course it's right. And if some of you haven't experienced it yet, it's absolutely the truth. And I urge all the young ministers who've got churches, you begin to consider that. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. But begin to look out somebody to help you. Don't wait and say, well, we can get somebody 250 miles to come and help us. Well, that's better than nothing. But brother, you ought to begin to raise up some men in your own church. And some people's afraid that some preacher's going to take their place. Well, if I got a congregation that I'm afraid, I'm always afraid somebody's going to take my place, they can have it. I'm not going to worry about that. Would you? If you've got a congregation of people like that, you don't have a trustworthy people. They don't care much about you.
Amen.
Right. Yes. But I don't think we've got churches. Surely we don't have churches like that now. But it's only a business like manner. We've got property. We've got property. The saints built that church. You didn't build it. Did you buy it?
That's right.
There's some preachers acting like they bought the whole church.
That's all right.
Yes, indeed. And then will it to whoever they think they want to will it to, even their ungodly children. Brother, there ought to be a law in this body to protect the people.
Right.
We ought to have a law that protects the saints. Amen. Everybody should say it. We should have a law that protects the saints as well as protects the preachers.
Amen.
I want a law like that, don't you?
Yes. Amen.
Yes, indeed. A lot of preachers gets rich off of a church and turns around and sells it.
Yeah, that's right.
Haven't you heard about that? Have you ever heard about that? Yes. Brother D knows what I'm talking about, don't you, Brother D? Yeah, people selling churches where the poor saints and the widow women and the old people and the retired people just barely get enough money, gives their money to build and keep a church going and enlarge a church. And then a pastor tries to take all the money. And then and then the trustees come up to him and say, how much money we got in the bank? That's not for you to know. Well, there ought to be a law. There is a law against that in the natural. If the government ever finds out you're operating a church like that, you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble, aren't you? You're in big trouble. Yes, indeed. Somebody said, well, that ain't none of their business. That ain't. What is a trustee for? Like a guard dog? There's something in his trust, or you shouldn't have him. Well, I'm not telling you how much money we've got. It's none of your business. How much did you take in last month? That's all right. I know how much I took in. How much did you spend? I don't know fully how much I spent, but I spent it on good things. That's a wonderful way to run a church, ain't it? Preachers used to run a church from their back pocket. They paid the light bill, the water bill, the gas bill, the rent bill. Yes, and stuck the rest in their pocket, the other side of their pocket. Then they leave, they wanted to sell a church. Why, that's the truth, brother. You know that. You've been in the way a long time. You've heard about things like that. Well, don't you believe there should be a law in this body of people that would prohibit such things like that? And then if something like that happened, if they wouldn't adjust themselves after a couple of times, they're called a heretic.
Right.
You mean to tell me that isn't the rule of God? That isn't the law of God? Now, there's some things, like the 5th chapter, 6th chapter of the book of Acts, that just came on them. That just developed in there, but they met it, didn't they? They met it head on, didn't they? And there's some things there about marriage and divorce. The Bible don't say a thing about it, but we've got to meet it head on and give the best answer possible in connection with the Scriptures that Jesus gave and Paul gave and the Old Testament gave to eliminate the negatives and accentuate the positive of it. I want to get in something safe. Yes. And you fellas that got wives, don't you want them to be left with something in the church if they worked all their lifetime in it? Or do you want them to have to go out and get a scrub job somewhere? And if I become incapacitated after I've been in the ministry all these years, and some people think I'm a rich man, well, you're just all wrong. I wish you was right. But I'd like for you fellas to kind of help me a little bit. If the church couldn't help me, wouldn't you help me, brother? I'd help you. We've helped other preachers, haven't we? I hope I never get like that, but the idea is I want some security. I want to get in the body of people down here that gives me some security and gives my church some security. And we stand together and work together and share together. His brother went up to a certain preacher and built a big tabernacle for him. That's what I call brotherly love. That's old-fashioned Kentucky hospitality. Kind of Texas, too. Yeah. You know, if I've got my house insured and I come home one night and it's up in flames, I got it heavily insured. I look at it, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Brother, I got it heavily insured. If it burns up, I didn't want it to burn up, but if it does, I'll build one as nice or better. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I got hospitalization insurance. If I go to the hospital, you better have some now. Or if you've got any money, it'll sure wipe it out in a few days. I got hospitalization insurance. Yeah. It's awful nice when you get a bill for about $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, or $3,000 as long as staying there, and you know you got insurance to pay it off. It's just wonderful. Isn't it wonderful? And then, of course, if you die, you won't know nothing about it. But I've got death benefits, too. But the benefit don't go to me, unfortunately. The main thing is security. And I like to go to sleep of a night time, and I live on a very busy street, and I like to go to sleep of a night time hearing that siren. I know there's a couple of cops in there. Yes. Go to sleep better, can't you? What if you live in a town where there's no law? I got to scare the wits out of you, wouldn't it? Every time you heard a knock on the door, you think somebody's going to come in and gang you. Nobody will protect you. Well, you say the Lord will protect us. Yeah, that's true. It's like a fellow said, I don't need no death benefits. I don't need no policy. Going around trying to tell people about it stuff, you know, that's ignorance. And then, his wife died. He didn't have a penny to bury her. And the church had to bury her. You mean to tell me that's wisdom? Well, it is wisdom in a way. You could spend the money for something else, you know, wouldn't have to buy insurance. That's wisdom in that way. But it was poor judgment. What I've been talking about is security. Yes, indeed. And it's awful nice to know that my brother and my brother and my brother and my brother and my brother are all working together for the building of the body of Christ. and the office that we're working in, that we're contributing and giving our best, as you said last night, give the best we got. And somebody else here said that today, the best we've got. What I'm talking about, I'm not going to say vote. I don't believe in stuff like that. But can you see? Can you see? Since you've been coming here to this church, all you preachers, can you see any men that you could trust to begin to take some authority? Not whether you give the authority or not, men's going to take it. It'd be better if you'd give the authority.
Yes, sir.
Give the authority on these problems that come up in the church, so we can help pro and con and these problems. And then when preachers doesn't do the right thing, like this preacher I mentioned, that we can deal with that preacher. And then if that preacher doesn't straighten up according to the Bible, that we can disfellowship him, and the whole body will disfellowship him, and he won't have a chance to maneuver and worm his way in other churches and come to your different churches, and you all give him the right hand of fellowship when he's been disfellowshipped because of what he's done. Do you believe in keeping a man that's a fornicator and still committing fornication? What are you going to do about a man like that? I'm talking about, do you know it? What are you going to do? Let him go? You take a man as a thief. He don't have to rob a bank to be a thief. If a man would borrow $500 from me and wouldn't pay it back, I'd say he was a thief. If he could, I'd say he was a thief. That's dishonesty, is it not? And John said, know them that labor among you. We got to know people. And after you know them, Diotrephes, he was a fine character, wasn't he? Now John for a while thought that probably he was all right. Seemed like he left him there in charge of that church, didn't he? It seemed like it was. Yeah. Said, well, now I hear about him. He's throwing people out of the church. That shows you the respect that he had for John. But John said, I'll remember him. When I get back, I'll work him over. But that shows you that those men had a certain amount of authority. Now, personally, I'm supposed to have authority over my church, but I don't use that authority to hurt anybody, only the ones that will not obey the rules of the church. But I'm there to help them, and those who don't obey the rules of the church, I try to help them. I got only one woman in the church, and she's a oneness woman. She believes in one God and no more. I doubt sometimes she believes even in one God. And I run into cases, and I investigate their mentality and their age and their background. And this is a woman you'd have to knock in the head. The only way to get her quiet would be knock her in the head. And do you know there's preachers like that? Where's Brother Days? I won't call that man's name, but Brother Days was out to the camera, wasn't he? And there's a fellow got up there, and Brother Days told him to sit down. He had talked the day before, told him to sit down. And he has a messianic complex. He's full of hallucinations. And he said, sit down. He said, I'll not sit down. He kept on talking. And the other trustee said, sit down. He just kept on talking. He said, no, I won't sit down. Now, there's only one way to get that fella down. It's either to about 2 or 3 big, strong men cast him out. Or just let him go on and talk. As a fellow one time said, there's different methods to use on trying to help people. Here's a railroad track, and a great, big, ugly, stubborn, bull-headed, ignorant fellow is walking down the track. Hey! There's a train coming! Get off the track! Hey! It's getting closer! Well, now his method had to change. He took a pillow, walked up to him and hit him with the pillow, and he just kept on walking. Finally got a great big 2x4. Walked over to him and knocked him completely out and drug him off the track just when the train come by. So it says, give strong drink to them that are ready to perish. So I believe in trying every method possible. And then when it comes to the finality, the saturation point, you've got to give them the works. But we need men to work together. I wish personally we had the gift of healing here operating, don't you?
Yeah.
I wished we had men that could answer those 252 questions without trying to take all day on each one. Just give a pithy answer on each one of those questions. And then if you did that, I'd write 250 more. But the time's going to come that this ministry, and see, I've got faith in you have too, that this ministry is going to have all the gospel. I haven't failed to declare the whole counsel of God to you. But as there was ministers like that in the early church, remember there's going to be another church, and I feel like this. That church dealt with one nation. Just a few million people. And this church has got to deal with about 5 billion people. Do you all get that? About 5 billion people. There was an Armageddon, destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 that only killed 1 million people. You folks just listen to this. It only killed around 1 million people and made slaves out of many more. But this end time battle is going to destroy almost all of civilization, comparatively speaking. And a little illustration of the greatness of it, the blood will run to the horse's bridle. 1,600 furlongs in space are the equivalent of 200 American miles. Now that don't mean that's just a figure of speech. There's not going to be any blood in this to speak of. It's going to be cremation. There won't be no blood running. It's going to be cremation. And do you see the awful almost genocide that awaits this country? And it's all going to culminate after God has a period of time to witness a church just like the church he had in the beginning to get the early rain, a church to get the latter rain, because the two witnesses are going to stand on their feet again and witness the same message that they witnessed before, with the same authority and the same power. And brother, I would that you would consider these few statements that I've made and pray about it, because it's a great responsibility. And almost all you men agree that you say that's the truth. There ought to be something like that set up. As somebody said, who told you to do it? Well, the Lord possibly didn't come down like he did that fellow out in Oklahoma and sat on our beds for about 17 hours. How many? No, 7 hours, wasn't it?
7 hours.
7 hours and talked to him for 7 more. I don't believe that. I don't believe God had left business in heaven for 7 hours with almost 5 billions of people and come down there and talk to this feller out in Oklahoma. And he said he had a vision of the Lord. It looked like he was a skyscraper. So we want you to consider, by the grace of God, that God will do something right in this meeting for us. Now the meeting will be closing in quarter to 1, quarter to 2, quarter to 3, about 3 hours. And it would be good. I'm not taking this authority on myself. You can do it otherwise. But I'd like for somebody else to speak on this and say things that I didn't say. Do we need or don't we need a small group of men that feels like it? That feels like it. It's been somewhat of a success in their works. Yeah. I don't say this boastful, but I might as well blow my own horn. I don't hear nobody blowing it for me. But I went down to this man's section of the country, and he knows, and his brother is sitting next to him, and this brother does, that their work had went to pieces, hadn't it? There's a great reproach on it. They were ashamed almost to get their head up as they walked through town. Not because of them, but because of lack of proper instructions and planning. Yes, indeed. Remember, when you take over a work, it's not a success. You know, a lot of people blame it on the people. Say, it's the people's fault. It wasn't mine. Like somebody come up and be prayed for, you're a divine healer. Somebody comes up and be prayed for, and they don't get nothing. Say, brother, the trouble is you don't have faith. You don't have faith. Well, it isn't that. He's the one that didn't have it. He didn't have the such as I have given unto thee. And this brother turned the work over to me. Not this brother, but the brother was there, turned the work over to me. And it looked like it was impossible. It just looked like it was impossible. And when I went to DuQuoin, Illinois, and they turned the work over to me, there was preachers diving in the water, and they'd get this baby in their arms and look at it and throw it back in the water and go and leave. You know what that was? That's preachers coming through that took charge temporarily of that little group of people there in DuQuoin, but they didn't want it. And finally, I dove in the water and got it and brought it out. And when I left there, we had a nice-sized church, and that church is still going on. Well, it's not under my jurisdiction, but the church is still going on to a great extent. And now, at the present time, every bill has been paid, and they had a lot of bills, didn't you? They're all paid, and they've got a nice church just real close to town. It's very accessible to people coming through, and they have over 100 members there in the church right now. And incidentally, I was down there Sunday before last, and will you let me talk a little tiny bit longer? I've listened to you all for 52 years. Sure, you can listen to me for a couple hours. And there was a Catholic man and his wife. They're still coming, aren't they? I mean, Catholic people. And I don't know, I didn't do it intentionally, but I was talking something about the devil. And this may hit some of you all. Because I don't believe in a personal entity that runs the show of evil individual. And I was talking, and you know the Catholic people, they believe in a personal devil, don't they? They really do. Or they think they do anyway. And after I got through, that woman told you, wasn't it? I put him in as the elder in the church down there. And she told him, she said, I got a revelation on the devil while Brother Sowders was talking. She said, I don't believe there's a personal devil anymore. I said, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. But he's having a lot of fine people coming to his church now, over 100 people. And he's going to have to enlarge the building. Well, did that happen accidentally? Did that happen accidentally? I know. It didn't happen accidentally. And you folks have got similar conditions that you went to different churches and the conditions they were in. And if we could all begin to consider now that we're in need of something, and now to me, since I'm responsible for a lot of things, I'm concerned about getting it on foot. And some of you may not be concerned about this, and I wouldn't condemn you because you're not. But most of you elderly people and elderly ministers, don't you realize that we need a special undergirding of a ministry that not you can look to as your boss or your leader or anything like that, but thank God for certain offices that are beginning to infiltrate the church where they're helping each other. And then all the ministers that can help them, get with them. Not behind them, get with them. And if you've got something to share, you've got something to share, share it. I'd like for somebody else to say some things on that.